We've been looking at some of the exciting things that God wants to do in our life, and for 2 weeks now we've been looking at how do you build a great life. Jesus came and he says, I'm going to show you how to live the abundant life. And so we've been looking at different components at that, and we will be looking at different components of that for the next few weeks. How to build a great life, or what Jesus called the abundant life. And over the next few weeks, there are components that we're going to add in. So if you're going to have a great life, thank you, you're going to have faith. In other words, God, how do we please God? And the answer is, you have to have bigger ears than I do. God is saying that there is only one way that you can please Him. There's only one way, or there's one thing that has to be there before you can please God. Now tell me, the owner's manual for life, tell me what is it that absolutely has to be in our life if we are going to please God. Can you know what it is?
Faith.
Love, faith, obedience. Yeah, God loves it when we just don't do a thing that's in His owner's manual. You got it. It is faith. What's Hebrews say? Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Now, the part about that is, some people try to please God through religion. They go to church, they have communion. Some people go through, they believe rules. A lot of, not so much today, in fact, a little light on this, but they have a list of do's and don'ts. So if you want to please God, you do this and you don't do that. And they check everything off. You don't smoke, you don't chew, and you don't date girls that do. And that will get you into heaven. And they believe that following this list of rules will get you there. And but God has said our journey to Him is a journey of faith. And I am going to ask forgiveness later, but I'm going to ask Cheryl to share with us in a few minutes their journey of faith in a campaign that they did like this. And I'm afraid that if she took notes, she would just go on forever. So I'm going to surprise her now. And the heart attack effect of her and Bud, if both come, will show you what it is to live a life of faith and to do what God calls you to do, and then what God does back for you. I could do this to a lot of people here, but she was looking down and didn't have eye contact, so I thought I could get away with her. All right. Now, how does this faith work? We're going to look this morning at Hebrews 11, which is called the Hall of Fame, God's Hall of Fame, but really, it's God's Hall of Faith. These are examples of people who had great faith. Now, what is faith? You see there, faith is believing when you don't see it. Faith is believing when you don't see it. Now, visualizing the future in the present, visualizing the future in advance, being certain of something you cannot see. Being certain of something you can't see. I believe it, what do we say today? I believe it when I'll see it. So whether you're an artist creating a sculpture, one guy, they were saying, how do you do this? He says, well, I have a picture of what it is I want the finished artwork to look like, and then I just knock away anything that doesn't look like that. He could see it before he could actually carve it out of the rock. And athletes, one of the big things for high performance is they have psychological trainers, whether they're NASCAR, whether they're track and field, whether they're long distance runners. They have psychologists work with them. Why? To see themselves winning. They have to see it, and then they can train and work hard to make it come about. And So faith is seeing something, and faith turns our dreams and our visions into reality. When we stay connected to God, faith becomes reality. Second of all, faith is obeying when you don't understand what he's asking you to do. Faith is obeying when I don't understand. And there's a lot of people here that he's giving us. Exhibit A for this kind of faith is Noah. And he said to Noah, Noah, the whole earth has become repulsive and contaminated with sin, and there is no good here. I'm going to destroy all of this, and I need to start again with you. And you'll become the first seed, and we will extend mankind out from you. Now, Hebrews says that it was by faith, that Noah built an ark to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who had warned him about something that had never happened. What's that mean? You have to circle the word faith and the word obey, and you put a line between them. Someone, when we were saying, what is faith? They said, obey. And so you have your faith, but then you operate on it, you act on it, you do what your faith is leading you to do. And I'm glad that Noah did that, because God says, I want you to build this huge boat. Not in the ocean, not near the ocean. Build this boat in the middle of a desert. And why would I do that? Well, Noah, I'm going to cause a flood. What's a flood? A flood is when rain comes down and everything gets covered with water. What's rain? It had never rained. Up until this time, there was a moisture came up from the earth. Among other things, God was changing the whole atmosphere. I don't know. From Moses on, you'll find that the people did not live as long, whether there was something that God changed or whether they introduced food additives at that time or whatever it was. The whole structure of the earth changed. Noah had never seen a flood, never heard of the thing, never seen rain. And so this whole thing was, what? All right, boat. You want a boat? Here comes a boat. And so he just obeyed without really understanding. I don't know about you, but there are times when it might seem a little stupid to be building a huge boat for 120 years in the middle of a desert. Can you imagine your neighbors? They'd call up the association. Hey, he didn't read his rules. You can't have flags and you can't have arcs in your lawn. So for 120 years, he stayed at this and until he was finished. Exhibit number 2 is Abraham. It was by faith, Abraham. It was faith that made Abraham. You want to read that with me? You got it in your bulletin there? It is on the, you got it? Read it. Let's read it together. It was faith that made Abraham obey when God called him to go out to a country God had promised him. He left his own country without knowing where he was going. Okay, there goes Abram, and God says, I know you're 75 years old and you don't have any kids, but what I want you to do is go out and I'll show you where. Now, he was living where Iraq is today. At that time, it was called Ur of Chaldees, but it was modern-day Iraq. And Abram is saying, wait a minute. You see all those servants, hundreds of them? See all those camels, all those donkeys, all those goats, all those sheep? You see all that? That's mine. You're asking me to move hundreds and hundreds of people to where? Where? I'll show you where. Just start moving. I'll show you where. Fine. How will I know when I get to where? And God says, I'll tell you that too. So Abraham leaves hundreds of servants. In fact, once he got into a battle, Lot got into trouble. He went down and he had enough servants and guards with him that they overcame a city, got Lot back. It was not just a few people he had around him. He literally could raise an army when the time came to defend his nephew. And so he takes this huge group of people out into a place where God wasn't telling him where, and wasn't going to tell him how long, and wasn't going to tell him until he got there where it was. Now, I think the beginning of this church, if you know, Ruth and Lou Walter came down here. They were working in Winona Lake. And if you've ever been to Winona Lake, you'd want to move to Florida too. So here they come. And God says to them, I want you to start a church. And they weren't qualified to start a church. What had they ever done before? Nothing like that. They just went to church. But they said, okay, yeah, whatever. So they started this church in their living room. And for years it moved around as it grew. Once they even rented a funeral parlor, but the sermons were so dead they had to move to the ballpark to get some life into the church. But I'm glad that they just said, you want a church? Okay, we'll start in our living room. And out of that came a body of believers, and we said that we have sent now 11 people that you have supported from Sunday school through to youth, and we put them into ministry here. But in the last few years, 11 people have gone from our Sunday school into full-time ministry. And that is all because Lou and Ruth, I don't know what to do if God said, start a church in your living room. I will if they'll wipe their feet at the door. You know, the inconvenience and the time and everything else. But here we are, just as an act of faith, they said, sure. So Abram is doing something of faith, going out, and things that happen don't make sense, and you don't always understand it, but you do what God tells you to do, even when you don't get it. In the owner's manual for life here, there's about 1,050 suggestions. Some people would call them commands. And he's asked you to do certain things. And he's saying, if you do this, I will bless your life. Now, if you don't do it, he doesn't curse you, but he was telling you to do that so that you wouldn't hurt yourself. When your mom says, don't play in the roadway, she doesn't get in the car and run over you. But when you play in the roadway, someone else might. You pay the consequences for not following the owner's manual for life. God tells you to do something, and your gut says, I don't know about this. I don't know whether I'm going to follow God or follow my gut. Like, I'm pretty smart. And what's he ever done besides create the universe and start with one man, one woman, and populate the world and all that stuff? But I think I may just do it my way. Now, God is doing things, writing things, teaching us things for his benefit? No. It's for your benefit. So that you can find out what Jesus was saying when he came to teach you how to live the best life possible, how to live the abundant life. And if you ignore it, it's not going to hurt God. It's going to hurt you. Some of it doesn't make sense. I tell you, one of the things that people struggle with is God says when someone hurts you, when someone attacks you, or when someone on purpose or not on purpose offends you, what did he say to do? Forgive them. Have them over for lunch. Put arsenic in their soup. Don't it'll bless them. That's not intuitive. Our instincts are to get even. God says, not only don't get even, pray for them. Now, today in science, we found out why. It's true, but way before someone got funded to experiment this, that anger, that bitterness causes everything from arthritis to pain to blocks your healing to it goes on and on and on. Now, God apparently knew this before the scientists did. There's an interesting book called Deadly Emotions. And you know something? There's another book that has all that stuff in it. It's the owner's manual for life. It tells you how to act in a way that keeps you healthy and keeps your spirit from being damaged. Now, all of that stuff is in this owner's manual for life. Now, God put you on the earth to enjoy it. It says he provided all good things for your enjoyment. But if you do the things, if you don't do this, you don't get to enjoy life to its fullest. And that's why it's there in the first place. This is the owner's manual for life. Now, the third thing, faith is giving when I don't have it to give. Giving and faith go together. The interesting thing about this is that God uses finances to test our faith. And do you know why he does that? It's hard. And it's even harder than you think, because when he says you can't serve God and mammon, and he does some other things, money and wealth has God-like properties to it. It becomes a God. And God is saying, in essence, which God are you going to serve? You can't love them both. Why? Because it is God-like. We react to it because it feels like God-like status. And Jesus Christ said more about money than any other thing. Why? Because we have to choose which God we're going to serve. It's simply that. And every time we give, we break the hold of that God over our life, and we open ourselves up to the blessings of Jehovah through Jesus Christ, that God, and then he can pour into us his blessings. So who are you going to trust? God is saying when he puts us to the test, are you going to trust my promises to take care of you and put you first? And he goes on through in the Hall of Fame, he names someone called Abel. Now, Abel, he didn't do anything spectacular. He didn't even bring a big offering. How did he slip into the Hall of Faith? It says he got there not because of what he did. He got there because of how he did it. He got there because of his heart as an act of worship came before God. He got there because he had reverence for God, and then he gave the attitude, not the amount, but the attitude is what God was looking for. Now, we've talked about this before. There's two ways to give, and there's a way of reason, and there's a way of revelation. Is that in the bulletin? Should have put that in. All right, write this in. Two ways to give, reason and revelation. Now, if you run spreadsheets and draw graphs, not that anybody here does that, but you do your math, you figure out what you can do, and you do it. Tithe is 10%, and it's easy. You just move the decimal place one, and you are a home run. But every once in a while, God says, that's not really faith. I appreciate it, and it shows that we've settled the ownership issue and that everything on the world is mine and in the world, and that is that. But now, sometimes he will say, I would like you to do something that is giving that requires faith. And that is when you talk to God, and God says, I need you to do something for me. And tithing is the baseline. Linda and I were married 45 years last August. Again, we got married at 6. We had to get our mother's permission, so we're not as old as you think we are. There's a time to say amen, and there's a time not, okay? Here. We have never done anything but tithe. It's just we did it from kids. We got married, we did it. And in my life, I have found that God delivered his promise out of the owner's manual, which is he will make 90% go farther than 100 if you'll tithe. Are you tracking with me? Now, for 45 years, he's kept his faith his word to me. And that is a case of just believing what he said. Just out of idle curiosity, how many for years have had God bless and make the 90% go further than the 100? Can I see your hand? Yeah. If you follow him, the 90% will go further. He says, a good example is, it's time to confess now and shame the devil. How many have done stupid financial things? Yeah. One of the reasons that you will prosper better is because God, who sees the beginning from the end, will walk beside you and help you avoid disaster. It only takes one or two really good financial disasters to set you back. And God says, if you'll walk with me, I will guide you. By the way, I have some specific instructions, and I'm going through Financial Peace University again. And you have to, if you're going to be a Christian, you just have to go through Financial Peace. It is necessary to follow God financially. So tithing, you lay down the baseline. And then every once in a while, he says, I'm so proud of you, I would like you to do an act of faith. Now we're saying, this is going to cost me money. I'm telling you, it does not. When you think stepping out of faith is going to cost you money, that's someone sitting on your shoulder, and it's not God. I have never, since 1995, traveling around and working with churches, sometimes 8 churches a year, and I say, talk to God, see if he steps you out in faith. Not once have I ever seen anyone damaged by that act of faith. And quite often, there's no charge for this. This is free. I mean, and God is talking to the pastor, and the pastor is going to buy a new car, and God will say, and quite often it's have you ever had a dream car? Ladies, I don't know whether you guys have dream cars or not. I don't know. Your husband's such a dream. Why would you want a car? But anyways, because that dream's a nightmare. No, because you got a dream car, and sometimes and it will be like a Jeep or a 4-wheel drive or an off-roader, or sometimes it'll be like a Mustang or something like that. And they got this dream car. They're finally in a place of life where they can buy this thing, and God says, no, I want you to work in this campaign and give that to me. Now, I don't know about you, but guys and cars have this affinity. It's not quite as strong as a bond to our wife, but it's close. I'm just kidding. He loves you much as he loves his truck. Right. I have never, ever once seen one person do that, whether it was a pastor or somebody else, where God did not provide not only what they were to give to the Lord to build his kingdom, but he also provided, by the end of the 3-year period, the vehicle of their dreams every single time. Now, it's not God that's saying it's going to cost you. God is saying, if you'll do this, I will bless you. We rob ourselves of blessing when we don't obey God. Both of you want to come and talk, or just one?
Good morning, guys. I want to start just by saying that if you open up your heart to what God is speaking to you, you don't even have to listen to the pastor. That's the good news. The bad news is as he said, tithing is the baseline. When we go over and above that, it is a step of faith. Okay, it is a walk in faith, and there's so many times that God has been faithful in our giving that I had a hard time figuring out which thing I wanted to talk about. But a number of years ago, Bud and I decided to move back to Western North Carolina, where I'm from, and he was going to work for a while. I had a hospital up there that wanted to hire me and move me up there and pay for everything. And my daughter was going through a really rough time right then, and I just felt like I needed to be there. So we sold everything we had. The hospital paid to move us up there. We got up there, and it was awful. I mean, it was awful when we were up there. For one thing, right before we left, Bud grabbed a live electrical wire at work, and it broke both of his wrists. So when we got there, he couldn't work. The job that I was doing was very hard, and it wasn't a lot of money, and we were not able to help my daughter while we were there because of a number of issues that she had. But 6 months later, we put the house we had bought on the market and came back to Florida because Bud's work wanted him back, my work wanted me back, and we were drowning up there. So when we got back, we were broke. I mean, we were just broke. And we were trying to find a house. I don't know if you guys remember in 2004, real estate went berserk, okay? So a house that would have cost us $150,000 8 months before was now $300,000. Well, we finally found a place. It was $199,000. We made a full price offer from the front of the house, from the driveway of the house, and found that 6 other people had outbid us. But they were flippers, and the people wanted a family to have it, so we got the house. But we didn't have any money to fix the house. And at this time, the church we were going to was doing a campaign, a large campaign, a $19 million campaign to build a new sanctuary. And my husband said, if I build the Lord's house, he's going to build mine. And we decided, we prayed separately, and we came up with the same number that we would pledge. And it was a stretch. It was a real stretch. But we did it. We moved into our stinky house that needed lots and lots and lots of work. And we just kept moving in faith. Well, one morning I walked out to the mailbox and I opened it up. I don't want anybody to get the idea that God's a slot machine, okay? But he was such a slot machine with this. I opened the mailbox, and there was a check for $17,000 in it from the Longshoremen's Insurance Group that we didn't even know Bud was a member of because he didn't sue the company for his injuries, the electrocution that had happened 9 months earlier. And we lost a lot of money selling 2 houses in 8 months. And we got a $10,000 income tax refund a few days later. So we've never regretted stepping out in faith. And guys, it was hard. And I'm a preacher's daughter, so tithe and offering comes more naturally to me than it does to some people. And this is a very self-reliant, very independent man that God had to show in a very big way who's in control of our finances. And he did. And he does, and it happens every single day. I'm excited about the campaign to build this church up because somebody did it for us, guys. Somebody did this for us and did it for our children. If it hadn't been for Cape Coral Community Church, I don't know where my son would be right now. He's not every place he needs to be, but he's not in prison, which was kind of where he was headed when we got here. And our children need a firm foundation.
Yeah.
But we're all people. Spiritual things are apprehended spiritually. So the people that need this place, they don't get it yet, and they need some sparkles, right? We need some sparkles. We don't need it. The people who need Jesus need it.
Yeah.
So I would just encourage you, if you feel any hesitation in your heart about giving, don't. Okay? If you feel like this is not for you, don't do it. Don't do it. Listen to the Holy Spirit. Okay? Pray and do whatever he says to do, and you can't go wrong. That's it.
Amen. Yeah. Thank you. Now, I would like you to be attentive because I may ask any of you at any time to come up and preach. So just follow along. So, I got letters, hundreds of those stories, that God did something supernatural in their life. Listen, God says when we tithe, that's the baseline, and we say, God, I will give you. If you create a big windfall, then I will give you some. Help me win the lottery, and I'll give you back maybe 10%. I intend on giving back. So we say to God, show me the money, honey, then I will give it back to you. God says, whoa, but that's not faith. Now, giving it some back to me, that may be gratitude, but that is not faith. And when you ask God to guarantee or to show the results before you obey, then he says, look, that's not just stepping out in faith. God's saying, I want to bless you, but we're going to play a little game. I want you to invest and let me multiply. So that verse that says, the person who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. The person who sows generously will reap generously. And God will generously provide all that you need. Now, that story that she told, I've heard it over and over again. When Cheryl, who's a bit of a clean freak, says that, excuse me, but they moved into a stinky house that had been downtrodden and stuff like that. And God knew that she was driving Bud nuts. So God gave them the resources because of what they needed. Are you tracking with me? And so he will provide all you need. Then you will always have everything you need and plenty left over. Now, don't forget the rest part of this verse. We stop about there. I will have everything I need and plenty left over. No, there's a phrase on the back of that, and what is it? Share with others. And if you read when Paul's talking to the churches, he says, even if you have enough for yourself, go and work so that you can help Christians who don't have enough. We live in a community that looks out for one another. And all of this is dependent on God looking after us. Now, if you want to know God's intentions toward you, and when you say, it'll cost me money to give to God, that's not God's voice, that's someone else. His intentions are, I have plans for you. I'm not going to harm you. I'm going to bless you. I want to give you a future. I want your life to be better because you walked with me than it could be if you walked alone. That's the voice of God. That's his intention. Faith in the last one is giving when I don't have to. When I don't feel like it. If you only read the word and when you feel like it, you're not going to ever read the word because Satan will make sure you never feel like reading it. It's a discipline of life that you do whether you feel like it or not. All right. Athletes, they say, do you always feel like working 6 hours a day for your profession, your sport? No. You say to a musician, do you always like working 6-7 hours a day till you can become an excellent musician? And when Linda was praying, and she's not here today, so I can say whatever we want, but when we were traveling and singing, and we moved to a house, we had to buy a little grand piano so she could keep up. If she laid off for 3 or 4 days, I could hear the difference. If she laid off 2 weeks, you could hear the difference. You have to do some things by discipline, whether you feel like it or not. And reading the Word is one of them. But God said, I will enrich you if you will do the disciplines of faith. Reading your Word, talking to Him. Extraordinary people don't really exist. Extraordinary people are really ordinary people who have extraordinary discipline and do stuff even when they don't feel like doing it. I never feel like getting up in the morning, but I do. Anyways, all right. Now, the owner's manual for life tells us that how do you do this? You persist. You refuse to give up. You're doing the right thing, even when you're tired or if you get moody. I just threw that in. Now, it says that Moses led the people out of Egypt into the wilderness, and for 40 years they wandered around there. How did Moses stay on track for 40 years? Well, it was by faith he left Egypt. and he was not afraid of the king's anger. When he did this, he could have got killed for doing this. In fact, if the army had caught him and hadn't drowned, they would have killed him. But it says he held to his purpose like a man who could see the invisible. In order to have faith, you have to accept from God the vision and understanding of what he's about to do through you. And you keep your eyes on God, and he keeps the vision in front of you. And it's that knowing where you're going that keeps you on course. So how do you be persistent? Moses held like a man who could see the invisible. He kept his eyes on God. And you never give up. And some of you may be thinking about giving up. My marriage is never going to work out. My health is never going to get better. My kids are never going to come around. I might as well just kill them. That's a joke, in case you're watching this on YouTube. And so, never give up. Always persist. Keep your eyes on God. Keep believing when you can't see. Obey when you don't understand. Give when you don't have it. And keep persisting when you don't feel like it. You know, the interesting thing about marriage, this is a freebie too. When you act the way you want your partner to act, they act like that back. In other words, if you see what you want and you act that way properly, they respond properly. And you remember the book by the Kindness Challenge? That Kindness Challenge has put more marriages back together than many counselors. And all it's saying is, don't worry about the other person. You just behave the way you should and see what God will do. So here, we do stuff when we don't feel like it because God is at work through our faith. There's two other things that are needed quickly. Faith is thanking God before I receive it. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after the people had marched around it for 7 days. They marched around it for 7 days, and then on the seventh day, they marched around 7 times, and then they all screamed and yelled and blew their trumpets, and the walls came down. Now, modern scientists have said, of course the walls came down. The place was built on shaky grounds, and they can tell you scientifically why it came down. Moses didn't know that. He just obeyed God. It's a couple thousand years later we know why it came down. The reason it came down because God told Moses to march around it and then yell and praise God and bring out the trumpets and have a celebration. Moses just obeyed God. It was God who knew the foundation was rickety. So here, in the Owner's Manual for Life, it says faith is not believing God can do something because he can. It's the ability to not depend upon your thinking that God can do it. That is not faith. It's not believing he will do something. Faith is believing he's doing something right now, even when you can't see it. And in faith, you thank him for something that has not yet happened. When you pray, ask for something, and this is in your notes, and believe that you will receive it, and you will be given what you ask for. You're praising God for the answer before you get the answer. That's faith. You're praising God for the answer before you get it. Faith is thanking God in advance. And so, when you don't thank God in advance, it's kind of a statement that I don't know whether he'll do it or I don't know whether he won't, so I won't risk praising him in case he doesn't do it. All right. Now, sometimes we think that we ask for something and then we ask and ask and ask and ask and ask and ask and finally God relents and he gives it to us. That's not the way it works at all. You ask for something, you keep praying, but your prayers are, thank you, I know you heard me. Thank you, I know it's on the way. God always answers prayer. Every single prayer. In the Owner's Manual, it will tell you why you persist in prayer. It's why you thank him in advance. And is because he's going to do for you what he asked you to do. If God says, go tackle Moby Dick in a rowboat, go buy some tartar sauce, God is going to deliver Moby Dick. That's just the way it is. It doesn't make sense. Now, the Owner's Manual for Life says if trusting, faith is trusting, even if I don't get it. And you talked about God is not a vending machine, and he is a promise keeper, though, and he says, if you do this, I will meet all your needs. Well, he didn't give me my boat. Well, he said I'd meet all your needs, not your greeds. Why did God help them with the inside of the house? Because in our culture, and particularly for that particular woman, you don't like to live in a certain kind of house. They needed something to live at peace, and God says, I'll give you everything for your enjoyment. And so God provided for her what she needed and provided for Bud less racket around the house. So the owner's manual for life doesn't teach that you wear God down. It says that you keep praying, but you're praying for thanks in advance of what you get. Look, guys, when you get asking for stuff, remember that God is more interested in your character than your comfort. You have to deal with that. Some things he's just growing you. When I had those guys who worked out and they were growing their muscles, they actually put little micro tears, which hurt. That's why I quit working out. Why would you do that to yourself? And so it takes character and discipline to build a good life. And he's interested in your character, and your character comes from your discipline. Here's the truth. He answers every prayer. So fact number 2, he doesn't always answer them the way you want him to. Your mother and your father didn't let you drive the car when you were 11, although you probably asked. They didn't do a whole bunch of things when you were a kid because they weren't good for you. And sometimes God's answer to prayer is no. Sometimes God's answer to prayer is yes. Sometimes God's answer to prayer is not yet. We got to build some character so you can handle that blessing. Sometimes God's answer is not that, I have a better idea. But God answers every prayer. And all 4 of those answers are equally valid. God wants you to have character and strength and maturity, and for that reason, he will let you go through stuff. He can rescue you. Well, I don't like this. And he says, I would like you to exercise your faith. And when we come out, I'll be waiting for you the other side. I'm walking through it with you, but I will also be there. When we get through this, you will have character that you would not have had if I'd have went down there and rescued you before the whole thing went on very much longer. And God doesn't do it the way we think. Mrs. Green, who's Linda's grandmother, had a vision from the Lord about going to Africa, and she saw the crowds of African people, and she was teaching them the word. She never got to Africa. But she grouped a bunch of people together, and they started a mission to Africa, which is still going today. It was a mission field that my parents were on. It's the mission field that my mom supports, or did support, her whole life. It went on. She's been dead for decades. But that vision that she never got to go to Africa is, she started it, she never got there, but thousands and thousands of people have heard Jesus Christ because she responded. She didn't get it, and she always wanted to go to Africa. She never got there. But what she started is still preaching the Word of God today to thousands of people. So giving when you don't have it. Persisting when you don't feel like it. Thanking before you receive it. And trusting if you don't understand. And believing when you don't see it. Obeying when you don't understand it. Listen, which of those do you struggle with? I will tell you how to build your faith. You know where my struggle is. If you can't work it out on a spreadsheet, and if the math doesn't work, you got a problem with me. Because I don't jump out of airplanes with a parachute. In fact, I won't jump out of an airplane with a parachute because I don't know who packed it. I don't trust anything. And so my deal is, I don't understand why you're asking me to do this. and it doesn't make sense. I asked Linda, do you ever do stuff? Did God ever ask you to do stuff that doesn't make sense to you? She says, yeah, he asked me to marry you. So God does stuff but the owner's manual tells you how to build your faith. Faith comes from hearing the word. We build our faith. Over the next few weeks, we're going to start when people visit your home. We're going to start together and read through the New Testament in about 30 days. Why? Because a challenge to read builds your faith. When there's no reason to not come out of the next 4 or 5 weeks a stronger follower of Jesus Christ than when you went in. We're going to build our faith. I'm kind of excited because you are going to see God work in a way that you probably never have, and it's just fun. Would you stand with me?